Listen now, for this tale, well, it's the sort that makes the Spanish moss sweat even more than the August sun itself. It unfolded down in Savannah, Georgia, back in 1844, a time when the world was split clean in two, those who owned everything and those who owned nothing but the breath in their own lungs. The heart of this particular storm was the Harrington Plantation, a place dripping with money and built upon the backs of men and women who wish they were anywhere else. Master Thomas Harrington, he was the kind of man who measured his worth by the length of his cotton rows and the purity of his daughters. And oh, did he have daughters! 6 of them, 6 perfect pale blossoms, locked away in a house that was more a gilded cage than a home. And then there was Jedediah. Jedediah, he wasn't a field hand. He was the shadow in the grand house, the one who polished the silver until it gleamed like a river at midnight, the one who fanned the master while he slept. He was tall, but not overly muscular. His strength wasn't in his arms, it was in his mind. He had eyes that saw things the master didn't even know were there. The boredom in the master's wife, the fear in the younger slaves, and most importantly, the desperate hunger in the 6 Harrington girls. Jedediah was an anomaly. He had been taught to read just enough to manage the master's accounts, a dangerous education for a slave, but one Master Harrington thought made him uniquely valuable. It meant he understood the weight of words, the power of a quiet glance, and the structure of a lie. The plantation house itself was a silent prison for the Harrington sisters. Eleanora, the eldest, was 23, already past her prime marrying age in the eyes of society, and she carried the weight of disappointment like a heavy shawl. Beatrice, 21, was the dreamer, always reading forbidden novels about passion and escape. Clara, 19, was fiery and rebellious, prone to slamming doors and staring defiantly at her father. Then came the younger ones, Daisy, 17, giggling and nervous, Eliza, 16, obsessed with her appearance, and little Flora, barely 15, quiet and always watching, the one who saw everything but said nothing. Their days were slow, hot cycles of needlepoint, lessons on etiquette, and waiting for a suitable suitor to arrive, waiting for a life to begin that wasn't this suffocating routine. They were lonely, desperately lonely, surrounded by opulence but starved of genuine connection. And there was Jedediah, moving through their lives like a ghost. He poured their iced tea, he straightened their gowns, he listened to their piano practice, and he saw the flicker of something wild behind their proper manners. The master, he didn't worry about Jedediah. Why would he? Jedediah was property, silent and subservient. He was furniture that moved. But the master didn't understand the power of proximity and shared frustration. It started small, the way most great fires do. A misplaced book that Jedediah found and returned to Beatrice, not with a simple handoff, but with a lingering touch of the worn leather binding, a touch that acknowledged the book's scandalous content without a single word. Beatrice felt her cheeks flush. Then there was Clara. Clara hated the corsets her mother forced her into. One sweltering afternoon, she was struggling with the laces in her dressing room, cursing under her breath. When Jedediah walked in, supposedly to fetch laundry, she saw her struggle, saw the frustration turn her face red. He didn't ask. He simply stepped behind her, his large, dark hands replacing her fumbling ones. He pulled the laces tight, perfectly, efficiently, but his fingers brushed the small of her back just long enough to send a shock through her. When he stepped away, he didn't look at her face. He just said, "There, Miss Clara, you breathe easier now." And he left. Clara stood there, not breathing at all. You see, the air had changed. Jedediah understood that these girls were starved for attention that wasn't judgmental. Their father only saw their potential dowry. Their mother saw their reflection. Jedediah saw them. He started leaving things. A perfect, unblemished gardenia tucked into Eleanora's sewing basket. A flower that spoke of secret admirers, the kind of romance her life lacked. He would whisper small pieces of news to Daisy, gossip from the kitchens, stories of the world outside the plantation gates, giving her a sense of inclusion, a feeling that she possessed knowledge others didn't. The relationship he cultivated with each sister was unique, tailored to their specific needs. Eleonora, the reserved one, needed validation. Jedediah would stop his work just long enough to watch her play the piano. When she finished, he would always offer the same compliment, whispered so low only she could hear. "That music, Miss Eleonora, it sounds like freedom." Beatrice, the romantic, needed a secret. Jedediah began communicating with her using small folded slips of paper hidden inside the hollowed-out spine of a dictionary in the library. These notes were never explicit, never demanding. They were poetry, simple phrases about the moon and the stars, about the shared burden of waiting for life to happen. With Eliza, the frivolous one, he simply offered admiration. He would pause, gaze at her new ribbon or her carefully arranged curls, and give a slow nod of approval. "The blue suits your eyes, Miss Eliza. It makes the sky look dull." Eliza, used to only the critical gaze of her mother, found herself performing for him. Flora, the youngest and most perceptive, was the hardest to reach. She watched him watch her sisters. She understood the game. Jedediah didn't try to charm Flora with romance or flattery. He offered truth. One evening, he found her sitting alone on the veranda steps, sketching in a hidden notebook. He didn't comment on her drawing. He just looked out at the dark fields and said, "The master fears the night, Miss Flora, because in the dark, everything looks the same." It was a profound statement, a shared understanding of their position. Him enslaved in the dark, her imprisoned by the light. Flora looked up at him, a sudden fierce loyalty sparking in her young eyes. This quiet, slow seduction, this careful cultivation of 6 separate desires, took months. It was a masterpiece of patience. Jedediah knew the layout of the house better than the master knew his own mind. He knew the squeak in the third stair, the loose floorboard in the library, and the exact time the night watchman took his smoke break by the stables. The girls, individually, began to crave his presence. They would invent errands just to be near him. "Jedediah, I need water. Jedediah, the window latch is stuck." They spoke to him in hushed tones, their voices thick with the excitement of their dangerous secret. The danger was immense. Discovery meant the whipping post, or worse, being sold downriver to the sugar plantations, a death sentence. For the girls, discovery meant ruin, shame, and the absolute destruction of their future. But the risk, they found, was the sweetest spice in their bland existence. The crucial turning point came in early September. The master and Mistress Harrington were preparing for their annual trip to Charleston for a week of society events. This trip was the single window of opportunity, the only time the house would be left under the nominal supervision of a distant elderly cousin who was mostly deaf and preferred her sherry to her duties. Jedediah heard the plans being discussed in the dining room while he served the master his brandy. He didn't just hear the words, he heard the implication, a week of freedom. He knew he couldn't wait a week. The tension he had built was too great, too fragile. It needed release, or it would snap. He needed to make a statement, a decisive move that would bind the 6 sisters to him and to each other in a conspiracy of silence. He decided on the very first night the master would be gone. The master and mistress left promptly at dawn on a Tuesday, plumes of dust marking their departure down the long drive. The house instantly felt lighter, breathing a sigh of relief. That Tuesday evening, Jedediah began his preparations. He didn't need to speak to all 6 sisters. He only needed to speak to the ones who held the keys to the others. He started with Eleonora, the eldest. He found her in the parlor, looking out the window, a melancholy expression fixed on her face. "Miss Eleonora," he said softly, standing just behind her, his voice low enough to be mistaken for the rustling of leaves. She turned, startled but not frightened. "Yes, Jedediah?" "The master is gone," he stated simply. "And you are still here?" She frowned. "Of course I am still here. Where would I go?" "You would go where you wished," he countered, meeting her eyes directly for the first time. "You would go where you could feel something real, not just the ghost of what should be." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Tonight, Miss Eleonora, there will be a gathering, a quiet meeting, something that will make the waiting bearable." Eleonora's heart hammered against her ribs. She understood. This was not about tea or conversation. This was about defiance. "What kind of gathering?" she whispered. "A secret one," he said, stepping closer. "For all 6 of you, a shared dream, Miss Eleonora, a truth that only you will possess." Eleonora, the responsible one, needed to feel she was protecting her sisters, managing the situation. He framed the event not as a risk, but as a necessary act of bonding and release for the girls. "We cannot leave the house," she insisted, though her voice lacked conviction.
"We came," Clara declared, her voice low but forceful. "Show us what is worth risking everything for." Jedediah only smiled, a slow, mesmerizing gesture that made both women catch their breath. "Patience, Miss Clara," he advised. "We wait for the rest of the company." The air in the small room grew thick with the scent of dust, oil, and the sharp, nervous perfume of 6 young women who had never known a secret this dangerous. A few minutes later, the tapestry parted once more, and the final 3 girls slipped through: Daisy, Eliza, and Flora. Daisy and Eliza were huddled together, whispering nervously, their eyes darting around the shadows. Flora, however, walked in alone, her gaze fixed entirely on Jedediah. They stood before him, 6 sisters, 6 different shades of white cotton, 6 captive souls waiting for the signal to fly. Jedediah looked at them, taking in the full measure of his accomplishment. He had orchestrated this. He had drawn them out of their prison with nothing but whispered words and shared understanding. "Welcome," he said, his voice now deeper, resonant, completely devoid of the usual subservience. "You are safe here. For tonight, this house does not exist. The master does not exist. Only us." He motioned toward the blankets. The girls sat down tentatively, clustering together, a sudden shared realization of their transgression making them seek comfort in each other. Jedediah sat opposite them, dominating the space without effort. He didn't speak immediately. He let the silence work, letting the weight of the secret press down on them, binding them tighter than any corset. Then he began to speak, not about them, but about the world outside the plantation. He spoke of rivers and mountains, of cities where people walked free and chose their own destiny. He spoke to their deepest, most unacknowledged yearning, the desire to be the architects of their own lives. He spoke for a long time, his voice a soothing, hypnotic rhythm, and the sisters listened rapt. The fear began to recede, replaced by a profound sense of connection. He was telling them the truth about the world, and in doing so, he was telling them the truth about themselves. When he finally stopped speaking, the oil lamps had burned down low, and the moon was high in the small window. The girls were no longer 6 nervous young women. They were a unit, a unified rebellion. He looked first at Eleonora, the eldest, the one who craved dignity and meaning. He rose slowly and walked over to her. He didn't touch her, not yet. He simply stood over her, his shadow enveloping her completely. "Miss Eleonora," he whispered, "you are not a disappointment. You are a masterpiece waiting to be seen." Eleonora looked up, tears welling in her eyes. It was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever told her.
Then he knelt before her, and the true gravity of the night began. He reached out and gently took her hand, turning it over in his palm. He lifted it slowly, not to his lips, but to his cheek, pressing the soft skin of her palm against his rough, dark face. "Tonight," he said, his voice thick with emotion that felt entirely real, "I need to know that I'm not alone in this cage." Eleonora didn't pull away. She closed her eyes, feeling the heat and the texture of his skin, a stark contrast to the pampered whiteness of her own existence. She nodded, giving him the silent permission he sought. The door to their shared silence had been broken, and the dam of their collective desire was about to burst. Jedediah knew with absolute certainty that the night was just beginning. He had 6 sisters, 6 desperate hearts, and only a few hours before the Savannah sun betrayed their secret. The clock was ticking, and his audacious plan was finally moving from whispered promises to dangerous reality. The first sister was seduced, not by touch, but by the acknowledgement of her soul, and the others were watching, waiting for their turn to be seen, to be freed in the deep, dangerous darkness. Eleonora, her hand still tingling from the press of his cheek, watched him move. She was no longer the eldest sister, burdened by responsibility. She was the first conspirator, the one who opened the door to the impossible. Jedediah turned his attention to Beatrice, who sat clutching her novel like a shield. She was pale, her eyes enormous in the flickering lamplight. He walked to her slowly, his movements deliberate and unhurried, as if time itself had surrendered to the hidden room. "Miss Beatrice," he murmured, kneeling as he had done for Eleonora. "You read the stories of great passions, the ones where the heart breaks free of the law. You taught me that sometimes the only way to live is to write your own ending." Beatrice's breath hitched. He had seen her notes, his coded replies hidden inside the dictionary spine. He knew the depth of her longing. He reached out, not for her hand, but for the worn leather volume she held. He gently slipped it from her grasp and laid it on the blanket beside them. "The pages are thin," he said, his voice dropping lower, "but the truth between us, Miss Beatrice, that is thick and real, thicker than cotton, stronger than iron." He took her hands, interlocking their fingers, a gesture of shared creation. "Tonight, we are not reading a story, we are living it." He leaned in, his voice a feather against her ear, and the hero knows that the greatest risk is worth the greatest reward. He didn't need to say more. Beatrice closed her eyes.